guys, it's Natasha, pronounced Natasha. I wanted to do a video series on my Knockout Girl series, so I'm going to do one video for each book, and here they are. Don't know if you've ever picked them up in paperback. If you have not read Knockout Girl, do not watch this video. I'm going to be talking about everything in it, including spoilers. So if you haven't read it, go ahead and read it, and I'll wait. And now that you've read it, let's talk. So Knockout Girl, lots of people ask me where I got the idea from, or if I'm, from Hawaii or something. I'm not. I'm Canadian. I'm from Canada. But the book itself, the idea for the book was conceived while I was on my honeymoon in Hawaii several years ago. It would be almost 8 years ago. And I kind of had this idea of what would it be like for Hawaiian to have to move to Canada, but in the middle of winter, having never really had any experience with snow and cold and a typical Canadian winter. And that was pretty much my only plot point for Knockout Girl. And then, of course, Ellie meets Julian, she meets Cherry, she meets Adrian, she meets Uncle Dan, she meets Red, and things start happening. Of course, you read the book now, so you know there's going to be spoilers. When she finds out that Julian is being bullied by Red, which really bothers her, she doesn't like the idea of sitting back and doing nothing, but also what do you do in this situation, right? So, of course, at one point, she challenges Red to a match between Red and Julian. And when everybody agrees, I had to stop and go, oh, I don't know anything about boxing. And, that held me up a little bit because I had to stop and research. I've actually never boxed before. I'd love to do it someday, but I have never really gotten around to it. I've watched a lot of boxing videos. I've researched a lot of boxing. I feel like I know some boxing terms now, but I actually don't know how to box. So take that with a grain of salt. But it was kind of fun learning about boxing along with Ellie and Julian while they were doing it. So that was a really fun part of actually writing this book. So yeah, I love this book. I love everything in it. One of my favorite things about the book is just Ellie and Julian's friendship. Ellie is kind of this character who's a little bit self-centered. Back in Hawaii, she liked to, hang out on the beach and look at cute boys and do nothing with her friends. When she moves, everything changes for her. She doesn't have her friends. She doesn't go out of her way to make new friends or find out who her group of people might have been. And then, of course, we have Julian, who is a self-proclaimed nerd and loner. And they form this bond because neither of them have other people to hang out with at the moment. So, and of course, if you read Stand Up Guy, you'll hear the story of how they met from a slightly different point of view, but we'll get to that in the next video. So yeah, there's Ellie and Julie, and then of course there's Ellie and Cherry, and she meets Cherry, and Cherry's kind of this really cool character who kind of walks to the drumbeat, her own drumbeat rather, and I think Ellie really likes that Cherry went out of her way to say hi to her, make friends with her, see if she's okay. She invites her to work at her parents' ice rinks so that Ellie can make some money to go home for March break, which is really cool too. She never actually makes it back there. But again, if you've read Stand Up Gay, you know that, well, if you've read to the end of Knockout Girl, you know that her friends buy her a plane ticket to go back to Hawaii for a visit. And then, of course, there's Ellie's Uncle Dan. And Uncle Dan was a character that actually a lot of people told me they really liked him. They enjoyed watching his very subtle and behind the scene, in the background kind of character arc. He's a bit of a has-been boxing guy. He hadn't boxed in years and years. And he was also struggling with alcoholism. But when Ellie came along, she knew very vaguely that he had boxed at some point, and she begs him to teach her and Julian how to box. And when she explains to him why, he says, kind of reluctantly, well, if you'd led with that, of course. Let's do it. Let's get her done. I don't think Dan ever expected to come across a boxer like Julian. Julian, being a very academic person, isn't really athletic. He doesn't do a lot of sports or anything like that, but it turns out that he has a very natural aptitude for boxing, and he's determined, he's smart, but he was also good at it, which we also know that Ellie becomes good at it later in the series, but in Knockout Girl, I mean, she's not terrific at it. You've read to the end, so you know she gets knocked out in her first match, which is kind of where the title of the book comes from. So yeah, she's not great at it. My struggles with writing at the boxing parts is, of course, that I didn't know a lot about boxing before I started writing it, and also I wrote a lot about boxing throughout the entire series, and there are really only so many ways of saying that somebody hit somebody, but also I had to take into account the point of views that I was writing from. So Ellie has a certain way of telling a boxing match. Julian has a certain way of telling a boxing match. But of course, Knockout Girl is all written from one point of view, so that made it a little bit easier on me. So that was kind of fun, though. It is fun. It's challenging to try to write something new that you had no idea about. So yeah, there was all these new characters, all this fun stuff. Ellie also meets Adrian, who is a hockey player, and I don't think back in Hawaii, I don't think she ever would have hung out with, maybe not even an athlete, but definitely not somebody who played hockey. She'd have to probably go out of her way to find anybody who even liked hockey, because a lot of the people that she hung out with would have been into surfing and swimming and maybe biking or something, because she said that she did a lot of that back in Hawaii. So yeah, there was a lot of new experience for her. One of them, too, was just learning what it was like to live in Canada, and the seasons change so much compared to in Hawaii. In Hawaii, it's very temperate, so it stays about the same throughout the entire year. And for her, when she realizes that like spring comes along and everything starts growing, she's like amazed. She's like, this is so great. Like, I kind of like it here now. So, and of course her friends make a difference in that too. And then of course we had Ellie and her parents. And her parents are going through a rough patch now that they've moved. We don't really get to see all of the issues that they're dealing with because they don't talk about all of them with Ellie. And I think that's typical of, in real life. You wouldn't necessarily say to the kids everything that you guys are going through. So Ellie really only gets part of the story, and we're seeing it from her POV. But she also really cares about her parents, and there's a point in the book, and I have it marked out, and I kept it because I wanted to read a little part of it, very short, where Ellie realizes that like she's known for a long time that her parents don't always get along. She never really cared, but now she wants to care, especially seeing them so close to maybe a separation. But yeah, I have this quote. I would love to read it to you very quickly because this is one of my favorite parts of this book. I stopped paying attention to my parents' arguments years ago because I figured they had nothing to do with me. It was just kind of this normal thing where they'd fight and then pretend it never happened in front of me. And now it's real and it matters to me. It always mattered to them, and I feel selfish for never bothering to care about it before now. But that was the old Ellie. The new Ellie is a fighter, and if my parents won't fight for each other for their marriage, then I guess I'll have to do it for them. So it's at that point that Ellie decides she's not happy sitting back and just watching them do their thing. She'd rather try to help them stay together. And of course, I love happy endings, so they do. At the end, they do stay together. And but it's also kind of a turning point for her too, realizing now she's here in Canada, she's not going anywhere, and she's leaving her old life and kind of her old self behind too. She doesn't want to be self-centered anymore. She doesn't want to just think about herself. She wants to think about other people that she cares about too. And that includes Julian, that includes Cherry, who, she sees a guy who's being bullied, and she sees a girl who's pining for somebody that she doesn't understand why she's never been able to have, and she wants to help them both. So you've read the book, you know that Julian does compete. He and Red really go toe-to-toe through most of it, but Julian doesn't win his match, and it kind of doesn't matter at the end because he becomes a bit of a reluctant hero for everybody, simply by putting Red in his place. And even Red recognizes that Julian has done an amazing thing by putting up such a good fight. which of course leads into a really beautiful friendship that we see in later books, which we'll get to in the next book. So yeah, it's kind of cool. Even Red at the end of the tournament brings Julian back into the ring and kind of shares his victory with him, which is, reluctantly, very reluctantly. And we see, reasons why he was the way he was later on, and we will talk about Red later. I know he became a fan favorite, but I really like that moment where, Julian raises his hands and he hasn't even won, but everybody's cheering for him anyway. So yeah, it's, so I loved writing this book. I love writing it. A big theme throughout a lot of the series, and especially in this book, would be, the whole anti-bullying thing. And I wanted to get around that. I want people to know that it's not just about, Julian didn't beat up his bully. He had a fair match with him and showed that he wasn't happy just taking everything Red put him through lying down anymore, and neither was Ellie. And I think it was Ellie that gave Julian that confidence to step up and say he wasn't happy with it anymore, right? So even though Julian was a bit reluctant about it throughout the whole thing, he also recognized that, something could be done and something should be done. Some of that carries over to Stand Up Guy. If you haven't read it, I won't say any more about that, but the next video will talk more about those anti-bullying aspects and what happens with those characters at the end. So I hope you loved Knockout Girl. I love writing it. I love talking about it. And I'm so glad that you joined me for this video, and that if you've read it, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We'll see you in the next video.